Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something really fascinating: how a massive federal mandate actually operates on the ground inside California's prison system. You know, we always hear about these big laws and policies being passed at the highest levels of government, right? But the really compelling story is how those words on a page actually translate into daily reality inside the incredibly complex world of correctional facilities. This isn't just a bunch of boring bureaucracy. We're talking about taxpayer accountability, fundamental human rights, and the absolute logistical mountain of keeping people safe in environments that are, frankly, inherently dangerous. So let's unpack exactly what that looks like.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be looking at safety behind locked doors, how compliance actually operates, addressing the power imbalance, the sheer complexity of California, how we measure true safety, and finally, why institutional integrity matters to all of us.
All right, let's jump into Section 1, Safety Behind Locked Doors. Let's establish our baseline. Way back in 2003, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, was enacted federally to specifically target abuse in confinement. Fast forward to today, and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR, operates under a strict zero-tolerance mandate for sexual violence, staff misconduct, and harassment. And here's the key takeaway. The CDCR doesn't view this as just some annoying administrative hurdle. They see it as absolutely foundational to their state rehabilitation goals. Think about it. If an environment is completely dominated by fear and abuse, true rehabilitation is basically impossible. Safety literally has to come first.
Before we go any further, let's get a crystal clear definition of PREA. If you strip away the acronym, what you have is a vital framework for harm reduction. It's not just reactionary. It's an entire ecosystem designed to stop abuse before it even happens, catch it immediately when it does, and enforce total accountability. The whole goal is to build a system where abuse is fundamentally less likely to occur and highly likely to be aggressively investigated if it does slip through the cracks.
Moving on to Section 2, How Compliance Actually Operates, the Mechanics in Motion.
So, moving from policy to reality, you have to understand that compliance is definitely not a one-time checklist. It's a living, breathing, operational workflow. From the very first moment someone steps through the doors, the process begins. Step 1 is intake screening, where staff are actively checking for vulnerabilities and risk factors right at the gate. Step 2 is comprehensive orientation and training. And Step 3 is ongoing reporting and investigations. It's this continuous running loop of screening, educating, and investigating. Now, to make that loop actually function, a strong program relies on some deeply connected everyday practices. First, staff need regular, specific training to spot warning signs and preserve evidence. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, reporting systems have to be totally accessible. That means offering multiple, confidential ways to report regardless of language barriers or disabilities. Because let's face it, abusers will often try to cut off traditional communication lines. Then, investigations have to be timely and credible, because any delay completely shatters trust. And finally, you need leadership actively reviewing trends and taking corrective action, not just treating every incident like an isolated fluke.
Section 3, Addressing the Power Imbalance, and specifically, why consent is impossible.
This brings us to a really stark legal and policy standard. The CDCR makes this explicitly clear. Consent does not exist between staff and offenders. A prison environment inherently strips away your personal autonomy. Because the power imbalance between a guard and an inmate is so profound, the very concept of consent is legally impossible. Even if a situation appears voluntary on the surface, it is a severe violation. There is absolutely no gray area here.
And because of that extreme power imbalance, education becomes a literal lifeline. Abusers are always looking for uninformed, vulnerable targets. That's exactly why CDCR integrates this education right at reception. Early education drastically improves reporting because it ensures people know exactly what conduct is prohibited, what their rights are, and how to get help before they even reach their permanent housing. In an environment like this, Day 1 knowledge is your best proactive shield.
Which leads us to Section 4, the California Complexity, Scale and Scrutiny.
Think about the sheer size of California's correctional landscape for a second. It is massive. A compliance model that works perfectly in one place might completely fail in another. You've got high security lockdowns, community facilities, and open layout rural conservation camps. They all have entirely different populations, staffing patterns, and security needs.
Because of this, housing isn't just a simple assignment. It's evaluated meticulously on a case-by-case basis. You have custody, medical, mental health, and PREA staff all weighing in to ensure safe placement. And looking at the modern challenges related to that housing complexity, the year 2026 is a major upcoming milestone. In March of that year, the U.S. Department of Justice announced an investigation into whether California's housing of biological men in women's prisons violates constitutional rights. This represents a highly complex, ongoing legal landscape that wardens and state policymakers have to constantly navigate.
That DOJ investigation really hits the nail on the head regarding how operational decisions become thorny legal challenges. Facility staff are basically walking a tightrope every single day. On one side, they have the strict, non-negotiable safety mandates of PREA, and on the other, the constitutional civil rights of the incarcerated population. Every single housing decision exists right at that very tense intersection, which is why meticulous documentation and consistent policy application are so intensely scrutinized.
Section 5. Measuring true safety. Data versus reality.
So this brings up a really fascinating tension. How do we actually know if any of this is working? On paper, PREA compliance relies on these transparent, standardized tools. You have annual audits to review standards and put out public reports. You have incident tracking to spot high-risk settings and gather uniform data. And you have corrective actions meant to improve training based on year-over-year comparisons. Together, this machinery is supposed to act like an objective health check for the prison.
But, and this is a huge but, there can be a massive gap between the paper and the practice. A facility might look absolutely flawless on a spreadsheet, passing audits, logging incidents, using all the right definitions, yet the human reality on the ground could be a culture plagued by underreporting, a deep fear of retaliation, and totally inconsistent staff responses. A pristine, incident-free audit doesn't automatically mean a prison is perfectly safe. Honestly, it might just mean everyone is too terrified to speak up. Data alone just doesn't equal safety. True compliance requires fundamentally shifting the culture of a facility.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Why Institutional Integrity Matters, the Human Impact.
PREA compliance doesn't just impact the people serving time, though obviously their safety is central. The ripple effect is huge. It impacts families who desperately need to know their loved ones are okay. It impacts staff who need clear, unambiguous rules to do an incredibly stressful job. And critically, it impacts the public. Over 95% of incarcerated people eventually return to our communities. That means we all have a direct stake in making sure our justice system runs lawful, accountable institutions that don't inflict further trauma.
At the end of the day, maintaining institutional integrity in a system as gigantic as California's isn't some trophy you win, put on a shelf, and forget about. It's a daily, exhausting, continuous commitment. Keeping this massive accountability loop running across dozens of unique facilities demands constant training, relentless auditing, and total leadership buy-in. It is forever an ongoing obligation.
Which leaves us with this final, really important thought to ponder. We've looked at the rigorous policies and the staggering complexity of enforcing them. But if the sterile data on the page doesn't always reflect the messy, human reality on the ground, how do we truly measure a culture of accountability behind bars? It's a question policymakers, staff, and the public have to keep asking if we want a credible, humane justice system. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking to understand the real stories behind the policies.